really pleased, it's a pleasure to introduce Michael Westerfield. And he has been, for 20 years, he was the director of the Willimantic Housing Authority, and now he's retired, and he's been researching this for a few years, and he will be writing a book, The Road to the Poor Farm, which should be finished by the end of the year. So that will be something that we'll be real excited about looking for. He has been researching not only the local poor farm, but others as well, and he'll be telling you all about that. Now, please join me in welcoming Michael Westerfield.
It's great to see so many people here. You do one of these things, you never know. It's going to be 2 people or a full house. As Ben told you, I was director of the Housing Authority for over 20 years in Willimantic. And when I was there, I had always heard that the West Avenue project and Ashton Tower and the Wilbercross Apartments were located on property that once had belonged to the Old Town Farm. And that was sort of in the background, and I would ask people about it, and nobody seemed to know anything about it at all. It was like a piece of history that wasn't there in anyone's minds. And every now and again I'd look a little bit and try to find some information, talk to people, and it wasn't very much. I found a couple of people who remembered the building, a few older people who remember visiting their grandparents who were staying in the Poorhouse, town farm. And, but basically, a lot of people who lived here at the time didn't even realize it was there. So, as we were doing a development project there a few years ago, building an addition between Ashton Tower and Wilbercross Apartments, 2 high-rises down there. And as they were clearing the ground, they came upon this, which fortunately, you're not going to see very much looking at it until I tell you, but fortunately, Bruce Borders, who is a historic restoration specialist who's working at the Housing Authority, saw this on the ground and stopped the excavation and called me over, and I'd done archaeological work, and I immediately recognized this as the deposit from an outhouse. This was the hull of an outhouse, and in the old days with the outhouses, they'd throw anything they didn't want down the outhouse hole. And then if you were in a poorhouse and you came home at night, a bottle of whiskey, you might throw that bottle down the outhouse before you went in. So in this pile here, there are a number of bottles. One of them was Rene's Magic Oil, a very popular liniment cure of the time. And there was at least 1 whiskey flask and a lot of broken crockery, cups and plates and miscellaneous other things in there. And so I collected all that and put it into a recycling bin and sat in the corner of my office for quite a while until I was retiring, and then I said, well, I better do something with this. So I called up Nick Bellantoni, the state archaeologist, and said, you want this stuff? He said, yeah, I'll come down and look at it. And he came down and looked through it and said, you can take this and I'll have my students go sort through it and catalog it. And I asked him then, well, does anybody know anything about poorhouses? Is there a list of poorhouses in the state or books been written about them? And he said, no, there's nothing. You want to try something about it? You want to find out something about it? You want to take it on? And uh-oh, that started. So the first thing I tried to do was find out what this poorhouse actually looked like, and if there were anything more than the one original picture. There's 2 versions of this picture, taken some years apart. One was a postcard, and this one is in a copy of this at the Eastern Library, and I think it's on the Thread City website. The other one has same picture, same angle, except there's more wires on the telephone pole. It's done a few years apart. But that's it. It's the oldest angle. You don't know what any other part of the poorhouse looked like. This was from a 1904 map. And a copy of it was hanging down in the library, the Willimantic Library, behind the copy machines, where they drew in the images of all the buildings in town. And this is the poorhouse. Had 2 wings, an extension out the back, and then like a barn and a shed attached to it, plus various other outbuildings, chicken coops, and there was an ice house, and that gives some idea what was there. This is, I don't know when this picture was taken or what they were doing, but some sort of event in Willimantic on West Main Street, and in the background here is the town farm. You can get an impression how big that building was. And there's nothing at all in this area. This is all town farm land. And that's like barn behind it there. This is the aerial photograph in 1934. And down here is the town farm. It's barns and sheds. So another barn. And this, I think, is a quarry where Little Cross Apartments was built partially in a quarry. And the walls that are around the poorhouse in the picture there, and the walls that you can see still at the VFW, from stone from this quarry. And the walls of the VFW were part of the walls of the town farm. This is a 1956 geological survey map, and this is really interesting. This is another thing that's been completely forgotten. This is the VFW building over here. This is the town farm building, and that whole area that was empty in the last picture. These are three-story buildings, three-story wooden frame buildings that were apparently built as part of the war effort to house people working in Grand Rex and other companies at that end of town. And nobody knows anything at all about that. You? Yes?
I lived there, so I can tell you after.
Oh, great, excellent.
Tell you about
That's like, there's no pictures of them, nothing you can find out about them. And they're just completely vanished as well. So, this whetted my appetite, and I started trying to find out more about town farms and what they were. And this is what the area looks like now. The town farm would be right in here, the town farm building. And the barn where the outhouse would have been was back here. And this is a 1920 map of where poorhouses, town farms were in 1920. And there's 64 of them in the various towns in Connecticut in 1920. The ones that are in yellow were owned by the towns, and the ones that are blue were privately operated. Every town either had their own town farm, their own poorhouse. Technically, the state called them almshouses, alms for the poor. Every town had an almshouse or contracted with another town to keep their poor. And again, it's like, this is a piece of history that's been completely forgotten. They were everywhere. They're like bedpans. Everybody had one. And now people wonder what they were, youngsters. At any rate, so I started researching the project, and any piece, any historical event, anything has a long history. It doesn't just start right now. You think of the town farm in Windham as being unique, and then you find out it's one of 64, and then you look to see where it started, and it all started with this gentleman. Henry VIII is responsible for it, at least in part. He's most known by Americans, at least, for the number of wives he had. But he also became head of the Church of England, and in doing so, he dissolved the monasteries. There were over 800 monastic institutions in England at the time. They owned a lot of land. They also were the people who primarily took care of the poor. They took care of, everyone had, or many of them had a hospital. They took care of the elderly. They were the primary people taking care of the elderly poor. They took care of the sick. They took care of the lame and the halt, and they provided, food and alms to the outside poor. And when he dissolved the monasteries, suddenly that was all gone. And they had to think of other ways of doing it. At the same time that he was dissolving the monasteries, Europe was passing from the feudal age into the more cash economy, and suddenly you had a lot of unemployment. You had peasants being forced off their land for raising sheep. You had more paupers than ever. There's a whole plague of sturdy paupers wandering the land looking for work. So, under King Henry's rule, they tried a couple of things, did a couple of paupers laws, but a lot of times when a guy messes it up, it's left to a woman to fix it. So, so his daughter had to deal with it. And during her reign, there were a number of attempts to create poor laws, and it all culminated in the Poor Law of 1602. And the Poor Laws that Queen Elizabeth created in 1602 continued in effect in England and in Connecticut up until the 1950s or so. Really up until President Clinton changed welfare as we knew it. They, word for word, some of them remained on the books until very recently. These are the basic features of the poor laws. Each town was required to provide for the needs of its own poor, and only its own poor. Overseers of the poor would be selected. And as you go through, there's a lot of material left from those days in terms of selectmen's correspondence and whatnot that was at town hall. Most of the correspondence is about which town has to pay for which paupers. We have your pauper here, and he's been receiving services, and you owe us $7. And taxation to support the poor was authorized. Foreigners, and foreigners included anybody who wasn't from your town, or anyone who didn't have residency in Connecticut, were the responsibility of the state. So there's also people who would argue, this person is a state pauper, get him out of here. And if a pauper was from some other town who was in your town, the normal thing to do was to get him out of town. And in those days, there really was not much in the way of transport, obviously, in the early colonial days. So they would pass the person from constable to constable along until he got back to wherever he came from. And the immediate family of a pauper had the first responsibility for providing for his or her needs. Only if they couldn't do so was the town required to provide support. So there were cases where the town would bring a person to court for child support, for father support, for very much as it is now, that people are responsible for their offspring, for their parents. Well, this is, without question, paupers were entitled to food, shelter, clothing, and medical care. If they could not afford it, if their town could not provide for them, their family could not provide for them, the town, unquestionably, there's no question about it. The town was required and obliged to take care of that person. Of course, this was New England, and where we have the twin virtues of being of kindliness and religiosity, and also we are very very sharp in our finances. So we take care of the paupers. They were entitled to it, not 1 cent more than they were entitled to. And there's always a battle of how much paupers were allowed. The law allowed for the establishment of poorhouses, setting paupers to work, so you could have workhouses, you could make paupers work for their living, and bonding out children as apprentices. There was, if a child was living under unsatisfactory conditions, was being neglected, it was an orphan, there were no orphanages, there were no child services. We would just basically bond the person out, the child out as an apprentice to someone to learn a trade, and the boys were bonded out until they were 21, and the girls until they were 18 or got married. And this is something that's still happening nowadays, a distinction between the worthy and the unworthy poor. Who is worthy of receiving aid? The worthy poor, generally, without question, were people from your own town, decent people from your own town who fell on hard times, for no responsibility of their own, widows and orphans, the people who were disabled in one way or another, and the unworthy poor, who to this day are generally any able-bodied male, regardless of his circumstances, is considered one of the unworthy poor, even though it's the economic times are hard and you can't find a job, it's still unworthy of aid. And, these are the stalwart beggars, the able-bodied beggars. And again, the who is worthy and who is unworthy and who can get aid is still in question. Let's see what slide comes up next. So this is the monument to John Cates, who was Windham's first settler. As I said, the poor lords were transferred wholesale from England to the Connecticut colony. And the first reference to the poor in Connecticut was in 1679, when the Privy Council of England wrote to the governor of Connecticut and asked all these questions about how the colony was doing. And next year the governor answered. Things took a long time in those days. And answered all the questions. And the last question was, how many paupers do you have and how do you handle them? And he responded, well, we really don't have very many paupers because there's lots of land available, lots of work, and the wages are pretty good because the population is thin and work is scarce. That kind of lasted that way in Connecticut for quite a while. It was always pretty much a subsistence farm economy up until for many years. And the first reference in Connecticut records, in Windham records, of anything relating to the poor was when John Cates died in 1697. He left all the original settlers in Windham, got 1,000 acres of land as a part of their original settlement. The 1,000 acres wasn't necessarily, it was a theoretical 1,000 acres. It hadn't been carved out yet. So first of all, they carved out the sections down in Windham Center, where you have the old houses there. Each one of those had associated lot behind it. But when John Cates died, he left 200 acres of his land, which had not yet been designated where it was, to the poor of Windham for their use forever. Which is rather interesting because it's a story that still is going on. What became of that land? From 1690 there through the early colonial days, through the French Indian War, through various things, we really didn't, it remained pretty much the same. There's a lot of land, population was scarce, there weren't very many poor folks. But getting into the 1820s, industrialization was coming along, the population was increasing, we had more widows and orphans, more sick people. It was necessary to establish a poorhouse. And actually they started talking about the poorhouse, creating a poorhouse before the Revolutionary War. Then the Revolutionary War came along and all that was put on hold. And after the Revolutionary War there was a very deep depression, and which lasted for many years. And at any rate, they started up talking about the poorhouse, creating a poorhouse again in 1810, and things moved rather slowly. In 1815, they acted to, the town council voted to create a poorhouse, and it was initially located in North Windham, and this is from an 1856 map. This is North Windham here, this is South Windham here, this is the North Windham Road, except the road is not like this anymore. This is driving me crazy. Where the heck is the poorhouse location? And what happened is, between 1856 and the present, North Windham Road was straightened, cutting off this loop here. This loop is what's now Jordan Lane. This is where the North Windham, one of the schools is. And this is Jordan Lane. And this piece of road that goes over here doesn't exist anymore. So the poorhouse is actually located on the piece of road that isn't there anymore. But its actual location is right near where Commerce Drive is. There's a little industrial park there at the end of Jordan Road. And part of the land of the industrial park is probably part of the town farm land. And we have no idea what this, no, there's a bigger section of it. We have no idea what that looked like, no pictures of it. But this is the Canterbury Town Farm. It still exists. This is over by the church as you're going out Route 14 through Canterbury. And the original, we don't know what the original Poorhouse actually looked like, but we know what the addition to it looked like. There exists a contract that describes the building of the addition to it, which was 28 foot square and had a central chimney and 4 rooms and a gabled end, which means that, and it was supposed to match the original building. So the original building was probably something like a cape, and this building also had been extended. So the building probably looked somewhat like this, had several rooms, and it was not very big. This, which you can't read, is this. This is the 1818 contract of John Lascelles, Poorhouse master. And John Lascelles was probably the first paid employee in Windham, the first paid regular employee, full-time job in Windham. And he used to take charge of the poorhouse, and his wife and his family were to devote all of their time to it. His children were taught the privilege of going to school in the winter, and the youngest would go in the summer. And he used to take care of all the business. And the master of the almshouse lived pretty much the way the people in it did. It's said Lascelles, with his wife and 3 children, was to occupy the west room of the said house, 1 room, with a bedroom if necessary. So people didn't need very much in those days. And he used to get paid $140 a year, plus his bread, stuffed vegetables, and milk for his family. He was a cooper and a barrel maker, and he was supposed to apply his trade as a barrel maker, and whatever he did in the town in his own trade, in the course of his own trade, went for the sake of the town. This, amazingly enough, we know everything that was in that poorhouse. This is an inventory, and here's some of the things that are in it. Inventory in 1827. Every time one of the masters of the poorhouse turned it over to another, they made an inventory. And surprisingly, these things have survived. These were all up in the attic of Town Hall, and when they were cleaning out the attic at one point, fortunately Tony Clark and some other people rescued this material and got it over to the special collections at Eastern. And all this is available and cataloged up there, so you can go. This tells us there were 14 feather beds and 14 underbeds and bedsteads, so there were no more than 14 people in there, or stacking them up in the beds, you know. But there weren't an awful lot of people in there. Well, there were 13 old chairs, 28 coverlets, and 3 comfortables, which I assume were comforters. There you can see by the number of things there were, that there weren't very many people in there. They had their own loom, and they had yarn for the loom. There's the looms there somewhere. 1 loom, and reeds for the loom. And then all that pots and pans, dishes and kettles, meat barrels, cider barrels. And
14 beds, but only 7 plates.
What does an old do?
D-O means ditto.
Yeah.
D-O means ditto, the same as,
No.
Yeah.
Where we,
Go back 1 slide.
okay, yeah.
The last item.
4 old.
4 new meal bags, 4 old of the same. Ditto.
That's it.
Yeah.
8 meat barrels and 3 cider.
Yes. And this is all the food they raised. They were very much self-sufficient at the town farm. They raised almost everything they needed. One of the few things you had to buy was salt. But they, ham, pork chops, beef, potatoes. They always grew potatoes at the town farm. It's one of the things they constantly grew. They made their own soap. I don't know what the 4-foot wheels were. That just puzzled me. I'm not sure.
Spinning wheel, probably.
Yes.
That's what I suspected, yeah, but I couldn't swear to it. The master of the art house at this time was a shoemaker, and he had his tools and bench there, and had 4.5 pounds of sole leather for making soles. And chickens, dunghill fowl, hay, etc. So, this is a whole self-sufficient economy. And one of the things that's cool about this is it really gives you an idea of what the average farmstead would have had at the time. They had more of these things than the average one would have. This is interesting, which again you probably can't see, but I'll read it to you. In the early days, up until relatively recently, the care for the poor was a gigantic portion of the budget. The town budget in this year of 1828, the entire budget was $727.70. Of that, $377 went for the town farm, and another $109.77 went for the poor outside the town farm. So that's well over half of the budget went to taking care of the poor. We worry about the little bit we spend on the poor nowadays for welfare. And this was a gigantic amount in those days. The one distinction that we didn't mention was the difference between the inside poor and the outside poor. I used to use those terms a lot. The inside poor were the people in the poorhouse. The outside poor was everybody else. Basically people who received welfare, like welfare is or has been in our lifetime. People who received aid in their homes to the extent that they needed it. The contract system. One of the ways you could take care of the poor was by contracting out their care. And before there were the poorhouses, and even afterwards, this was the normal method it was done. It could be done right after the Revolutionary War. There was an incredible depression that lasted for years. And one of the things that happened then was that they auctioned off the care of the poor. Each town auctioned off the care of the poor to the lowest bidder. How little will you charge to take care of our poor? This led to incredible abuses. A healthy man might be worth a fair bit to take care of because you get the work out of them. But an old lady who couldn't do much, just sit down by the fire, you just starve her. But then, as time rolled on a little bit, towns got more wealthy. They actually paid people to take care of their own relatives if they couldn't afford to do it. In this case, selectmen are allowing William Bingham his past services and expense of taking care of his father. And this one is interesting. The person is taking care of his mother in Massachusetts. She's a local woman, but he's up in Massachusetts. And he's receiving the astonishing rate of 67 cents per week to take care of his mother up in Massachusetts. And this last one, if Windham in the early 1800s had anything like a welfare family, it was Walter Bottom and his brother Asa. Now, I have no idea what was wrong with Asa Bottom, but in the contracts for the masters of the poorhouse, for several years it said, the person is required to take care of all of the poor in Windham except Asa Bottom. Who knows what Asa's problem was? Someday I'll find out. But this is the kind of recognition you don't want. It's so bad that even the poorhouse doesn't want you. I expect either he was drunk or very mentally ill or something. The other method of taking care of people, another method was indenturing them out, as I said. And this is an interesting case. This is 9-year-old son of Eliphalet Dyer's former slave, Jube. And the slaves of Colonel Dyer and the other Windham Center folks are an interesting story. There exists a letter relating to Jube, who is also known as Jube DeLay or Jube Dyer. When Colonel Dyer's son was young, Colonel Dyer gave him Jube as a present. And come the time of the Revolutionary War, Jube was like now 18. And his son basically agreed with Jude that Jude would go into the service in his place and serve for 3 years. Not only serve in his place, give him the money that he made for serving. Jude served in the service for the required 3 years. And then as he was leaving, he had his pay script in his hand, and he ran into some sharpers who conned him out of it for pennies on the dollar in trinkets. And there exists a letter from Colonel Dyer to the Connecticut Secretary of the Treasury saying, do not pay those people this money. He writes out the whole circumstances of it in the letter that's in the Connecticut Historical Society. So apparently Jude did get his freedom, but here, a number of years later, in 1819, his son is now an orphan and is being sold into indigent servitude, basically slavery again, until he is 21. He's now 9 years old, so he's got a bunch of years to go. Connecticut's abolished slavery pretty early on, and to the point where people could remain in slavery until they reached the majority. But the owners of this, the former owners, were required to take care of their slaves if they could not take care of themselves. But indenture was one of the ways of taking care of them. This is another interesting story. The people who were in the poorhouse, this is John Clark. John Clark was born in London, and in 1777 he ran into a press gang and was forced into the British Navy. An unfortunate time to be in the British Navy. He wound up in New York, which was occupied by the British at that time, and he was sent to Stony Point. The Battle of Stony Point was one of the few battles that we actually won. It wasn't a gigantic victory, but it was a big moral support to our cause. And John Clark, along with the rest of the British soldiers who were taken, were sent out to Pennsylvania to do hard labor, basically. One of the things they were making shoes for the colonial forces. But after the war, he signed up with Mad Anthony Wayne, General Wayne, to fight in the Indian Wars out west in Pennsylvania at that time, and Virginia. He served there for a number of years and then lived around the state. And one of the things he received was, to go to the poorhouse, you had to have a permit offered by a selectman or a justice of the peace, and this was his permit, giving the reasons. He lost most of his fingers on his right hand, lost his toes on his left foot, was lame and unable to travel, much debilitated with numb palsy, was unable to help himself. He was finally overtaken in a snowstorm, unable to move, and so he could go to the poorhouse. Quite a life. It's done. This is another story of poor were entitled to medical care. They were entitled to the best medical care that they could receive. William Tracy died age 11 and was buried in the Windham Center Cemetery. William Tracy was from Norwich. He was up here with his brother. He was kicked in the head by a horse and apparently had a depressed fracture of the skull. And for 2 days and nights, every doctor in Windham labored trying to save William Tracy. They even trephined his skull. They used to basically drill into a person's skull to relieve the pressure. Using tools like this. This was a set of trephining tools from about that time. You would use this to drill a hole in the skull, and this to pry up a depressed fracture. Despite everything that they did, it was unsatisfactory, and William Tracy died. And he was from Norwich, so they sent the bill to Norwich, and the bill was for the outrageous amount of $48, which is an incredible amount of money in that time. But that was for 4 doctors for 48 hours work, and there's a lot of correspondence back and forth. Norwich was willing to pay the bill, but it was rather high. And again, if you look at the contracts of poorhouse masters after this, they say the master is responsible for all the medical care of the poor except Trofine. Because it was so expensive. That one puzzled me when I saw that in the contract until I found out about William Tracy. This is now we're moving we're moving more into the modern times here. I get into after the Civil War, there was like a series of depressions that went on continuously. There were probably 50 depressions between the Civil War and our current depression. And each time that it happened, working men, people who were working at mills, would be thrown out of work. And because you could have towns that basically were one business town. If that business closed temporarily, or they didn't have workers, all these people were cast out of work. And these fellows would go tramping around, walking around, looking for work. They weren't bums, they weren't paupers, they were working them, trying to find work. Armies of them moving around. This is some of the things that their receipts were. Cash paid to get the sore-eyed pauper out of town, $1.30. Cash paid to get rid of man, woman, and child, $1.10. 4 meals furnished to tramps, 75 cents. But, much of the time, the towns were sympathetic to tramps because their own people were tramping around as well, looking for work. And tramps were allowed to stay overnight at town farms, and most town farms had a tramp shack, or the barn, but there would be a tramp shack or a bunkhouse. And oftentimes, too, the tramps were allowed to stay at the police station. There'd be 50 tramps sleeping on the floor at a police station. The town farm in Putnam, building which is still there, they had a tramp shack, and they were right by the railroad tracks, and they had hundreds of tramps staying there all the time, passing through. So that's tramp staying one more night at the Windham Town Farm in 1874, with 367 that year. Sometimes they were good to the tramps, and sometimes then they'd have the periods of time we're going to run the tramps out of town, and if they want to stay overnight, they'll stay overnight locked up, and maybe do some hard time. We're now getting right about to the time where the great age of institutionalization started. Previous to this time, there really were no major institutions in Connecticut. We didn't have a hospital in Windham until St. Joseph's Hospital opened up, it's like 1930 or something. And there were no orphanages, there were no insane asylums. The town farm basically had to serve all those purposes. This is an interesting picture which I had to throw in just because it's fun. This is the town farm in West. There we go. What comes to my mind in a minute. West Windsor. Sorry, East Windsor, rather. And the building is still there. This is right by the ferry crossing. But here, these are sort of your typical people that might have been in a town farm. Here's like the old man and the old woman. This looks like the crazy farmer gent there with a long beard, and the guy acting out on top of the haystack. There's a family with children back here. And it's one of the few pictures that exist of people in a town farm, residents of a town farm. One of the amazing things that exists is a ledger of all the people who were in the town farm in Windham from 1883 to 1904. And this is up at Eastern. It is up in the attic of the town hall, and you can extract so much information from this. These are what the pages look like. 2 pages, and you have the name, the age, the nationality. speaking of the Irish, an awful lot of Irish here at the national holiday. This is their birthplace, their place of settlement. That's one thing, in the earliest time, people had a place of settlement. That was where you were a resident of. And who was legally responsible for you was where your place of settlement was. When they were admitted, this is the reason, this is the place of settlement. Under there, they list whether someone is a prisoner or a pauper. And when they were admitted, see some notes about why they were admitted, when they were discharged, why they were discharged, number of days there, and comments. And one thing about our poorhouse, when it was established, the poorhouse that was built down here in 1877, they decided that they should have a poorhouse that was not out there in North Windham, but was closer to where the action was, here where the work was, where people were more likely to be in need of it, and was closer to the railroad. Everything had to travel by railroad in those days. So they built they bought the poorhouse, Potter's Farm, down by where Friendly's is. In 1877, they hired Lyman, we heard about before, to run it, and he started work in 1878, and immediately the almshouse, the town farm building, burned down. And now, Dwight was a very ambitious man, pretty unique character, who wound up holding all kinds of positions of importance in town. And he basically designed the poorhouse himself, oversaw every step of the way of building it, and there was a conflict at that point whether it should be an almshouse serving the worthy poor, or whether it should also have a workhouse component. The town voted that it should not have a workhouse component. And so when the building was originally built, it had the front of the building, 2 wings, but did not have the extension out the back. It was basically in a T shape. And when they built it up, and within a year or 2 after it was built, somehow they built a workhouse addition onto the back of it. I'm not quite sure how that got authorized. But so we had both prisoners and we refer to it as the workhouse section and the almshouse section. In the almshouse, you had every person suffering from every possible catastrophe in life. You had, one of the functions that the almshouse always served was for the elderly poor. From the very beginning to the very end of the system, it was a residence for elderly people. And but you had the insane. There were cells in the basement where the insane were locked up. Fortunately, here, we didn't keep the insane people locked up very long. It opened up at about the same time they opened up the hospital in Middletown for the insane hospital, Middletown Hospital for the insane. We generally transferred the people with mental illness to the insane hospital in Middletown pretty quickly. But there was no hospital in town, so when someone was injured in town or suffering from an illness, they were either treated in their own home, or if they had no home in town, they were brought to the almshouse for treatment. So a lot of people with accidents are treated in the almshouse. A lot of orphans, widows, people who, when families had broken up, etc., you wind up with all these people in the almshouse. And no real distinction was made between them, except between the worthy poor and the prisoners. So town farm residents, these are the number of people in the number of entries in the ledger, 1,752. The ledger was a particularly horrendous book to work with to try to get data out of. Because first there were 500 pages in the book. It was divided alphabetically. And so people were listed not chronologically, but alphabetically. So all the A's were listed chronologically and all the Bs. So if you wanted to find out who was in the almshouse on any given day, you had to go through 26 pages. And then everybody in the almshouse on September 1st, the fiscal year, anyone who was in the almshouse was relisted there as being there September 1st. So you had 752 entries, but this only equated to 1,158 actual admissions because elderly people might be there for 30 years and get listed every year. The total number of individuals there were only 765, again because the elderly got listed repeatedly and also the prisoners tended to return a lot. Prisoners in the workhouse, 459, 39%, about 40% were prisoners, and about 60% were everybody else. The almshouse population is comprised of individuals and families who suffered every misfortune, accidents, illness, unemployment, substance abuse. I mean, all the same problems we have now: family disintegration, domestic violence, mental illness and deficiency, pregnancy outside of wedlock, and failure to meet various moral and behavioral standards. So this is the nationalities involved. Americans made up 128. The Irish were the largest proportion of people in the almshouse and certainly in the workhouse. The colored, who are Americans, are listed, the nationality is listed as colored. And I will use some terms during this that may not be politically correct nowadays. We no longer refer to people with intellectual problems as challenges, as feeble-minded or imbeciles, or people as being deficient or degenerate. So there's a pretty wide range of people, but mostly Irish, French Canadians, American, and Betsy Babcock. And when I first opened the ledger, she's one of the people that got me interested in this too. Betsy Babcock died at age 98 in the poorhouse. And Betsy is one of the very few people in the poorhouse who I could find a grave for. Her entry in the poorhouse, she's in the B's, she caught my attention right away, and it said, in that comments column, it said, "So disagreeable to get along with that no one will take care of her even though she has money." Wound up in the poorhouse, and I looked into her. Well, who is this Betsy Babcock? And I found out she was actually a direct descendant of one of the Mayflower pilgrims. However, she is a direct descendant of the disagreeable Mayflower pilgrim, John Billington, who was the chap who was hung for murder, murdering his neighbor, and it's always very difficult to get along with. I found her obituary, and her obituary said that Betsy Babcock, even from the earliest age, always knew what she wanted and always do it. And at age 8, she was told not to go out in the pasture and play with the colt there. But she did it anyway. She got kicked in the head, and some of her brains leaked out, but that didn't seem to bother her. And unlike William Tracy, who died of it, Betsy Babcock went on for another 90 years and died in the poorhouse and is buried there in the Windham Center Cemetery. She's probably one of the more unique cases. Now getting to the workhouse prisoners, the Irish made up the largest percentage of prisoners, and they were generally in there for drunk and disorderly. And you sort of wonder at the time how much of it was that the Irish were worse than anybody else in drinking, and how much of it was that the Irish got arrested for being drunk and disorderly. About that, the 28 Americans there. The French at this time were really just starting their immigration. There weren't an awful lot of them. And just maybe a pretty small proportion of the Irish made up the gigantic majority of the prisoners. Prisoners in the workhouse by charges: drunkenness and intoxication, breach of peace, vagrancy, intemperance, intoxication and crazy. Assault on boy throwing snowball. French gentleman apparently did not like having the snowball thrown at him. He served the day in the almshouse and then paid his workhouse and paid his fee. Another person who stood out was this one here. This is Mary Daly, who is in the workhouse for murder. And she was being kept there while awaiting trial. She was responsible for the Willimantic's first murder. Connecticut town excited over the crime. This is just about everything that's in this original article from the New York Times is wrong, but Mrs. Daly drinking in her cottage at the Horseshoe Bridge. The building's still there. It's right across from the entrance to a recreation park. I'll show you a picture of it shortly. Mrs. Daly's cottage. She was there drinking with a bunch of folks, including James Cockeran, whose name is misspelled there as well. Mrs. Daly's name is also misspelled. Something happened. James was stabbed. Everybody in town seems to have arrived at the house, including a typical Irish deathbed scene with the priest there and his mother there and the whole town around there. But the only two people who really could have been determined to be definitely there at the time were Mary Daly and Cochran's younger brother. And both of them were arrested for the crime and taken off to jail while thousands of persons were on the street, which is so hard to imagine. Thousands of persons gathered on the street. And the brother of Cochran was only 14 years old. The pair, Cochran and his brother, have a good reputation. Well, for some time back, Mrs. Daly has borne a bad name. In another article, she's described as a large woman of pugilistic habits. So, this is her cottage. It's hardly a cottage. It probably looked very much, the tenement house probably looked very much the same then as it does now. You say this is right across the street from the entrance to the recreation park. Two houses down from, there's the Horseshoe Bridge there. It's not this little bridge there now. And Cochran lived the other side of the bridge. Then, and they started the trial. They had mostly the whole trial went on. It was covered with great detail in the Willimantic Chronicle. This is another New York Times article. And the trial was almost done when influenza struck the town. One of the jurors came down seriously ill with influenza and couldn't continue. And they postponed the trial, and more of the jurors came down with influenza. And by the time everybody was well again, they had to do the trial all over again. And they had to panel a new jury, redo the trial. And this is when Mary Daly was in the workhouse waiting for a trial, because everybody had to be moved around by train in those days. And the nearest jail was Brooklyn. The Brooklyn jail was built, one of the services were built in 1840. And the judge had to be moved around by the train, and sometimes the court would be delayed for half an hour if the train was late. But they held the whole trial again and again. It was like CSI Willimantic. They had the forensic experts testifying. The police maintained, or the prosecution maintained, that she had been stabbed by a pair of shears that belonged to Mary Daly. Defense maintained that he'd been stabbed by the son with his pocket knife, and that the shears had blood on them, but they had wrapped up
the shears with the bloody garments of the boy in the same package, so the shears were contaminated. And the shears didn't fit the wound, but the penknife did. But because Mary Daly was a large drinking Irish woman, and Hugh Daly was a young 14-year-old boy with a good reputation, Mary Daly went to jail for life for murder. And the other people who were admitted to the almshouse, the medical admissions, accidents were vague, consumption, tuberculosis. People came into the almshouse to die. They could go have tuberculosis for many years, and finally for the last few days or weeks of their life, they came to the almshouse to die. Delirium treatments, alcoholism, exposure goes in feet in those days, and all the possible illnesses. Attempted suicide. It struck me when I was reading about that, if I was running an almshouse and I had people who were alcoholics or mentally ill, I would not allow them straight razors to shave with. And so he, actually, it was an attempted suicide that was successful. He cut his throat with a straight razor. Deaths at the town. Consumption, heart disease, opium eating. Many people were addicted to opiates. Opium wasn't illegal. It was a big problem in town. Most accidents, old age, cancer, and suicide. So there were all those deaths in the almshouse, and I tried to find out where they were buried. Mary Daly, Betsy Babcock and William Tracy, I could find their graves, but there didn't seem to be any record of where the rest of the people were buried. And frequently they buried the dead right next to the almshouse. So I got Nick Bellantoni, the state archaeologist, to come out to the front lawn of the VFW, which had never been developed for anything and had been part of the almshouse and seemed like a likely place for a graveyard. And he brought the ground-penetrating radar, and we went up and down the yard there and didn't find anything. Somewhere else they're buried. Some of them I know are buried in the North Windham Cemetery. There was a plot or two that was designated for the town poor there, but somewhere there's 20 years there were 100 bodies, and the almshouse there was there for 80 years, and in Windham Center for another 60 years, so there's got to be a lot of portable bodies around somewhere. This is Marvin Smith. He was a black man. He was born in Willimantic. He was a grandson of one of Colonel Dyer's slaves. In the 1816 census, he's listed as being 15 years old and a brickmaker, living with several other brickmakers in town here. At the beginning of the Civil War, they didn't allow blacks to enlist in the army, but after Lincoln did his Emancipation Proclamation, it allowed for blacks to join the army. Connecticut formed a black regiment, and within a week or so, virtually every eligible black male in Connecticut signed up for the regiment. There's something like an 87% of all black males signed up, so much so that they had to form a second regiment. Marvin Smith signed up and fought throughout the war, returned home like so many veterans, probably with traumatic stress disorder and a drinking problem, known drinking habits. He was in and out of the workhouse a few times for alcoholism, for drunk and disorderly. And one day he lay down on the railroad tracks and was hit by the train. The Chronicle had an article, the first article said that he had been run over by the train and badly mangled, his head and left arm badly mangled, and been taken dead to the baggage shed at the depot. Next day, the Chronicle article says, not dead yet. He's been taken to the Poorhouse, town farm, and it's the kind of accident that often run up in the town. A heck of a lot of other accidents in town. And he lived for another day and died, and was buried in the North Windham, the Windham Center Cemetery. And sometime afterwards, actually received a federal veteran's tombstone. He's the only black veteran in that cemetery, probably one of the few black people in there. And again, another one of descended Colonel Dyer's slayers. It'd be a really interesting thing to track what became of all those people. This is the Windham County temporary home. When the same problem existed then as exists now, when you take children away from their families and are looking for foster homes for them, the indenture business had pretty much ended by the 1870s. And you needed some place to keep them between taking them away from their families and putting them in foster homes. And children were not supposed to stay in the poorhouse, in the almshouse. They could stay, very young children could stay with their parents. They were not supposed to stay there. Just like now, families were broken up to children were seen as being endangered. And they built these gigantic facilities in each county. It's one of the few county facilities. And this one existed in Putnam and Danielson.
Says Putnam.
Putnam, you're right. But actually, the original version existed in Danielson. The first version had burned down, and they moved it to Putnam. And this housed a lot of kids. The problem that they faced, all these things are started with the best of intentions, and they usually wound up in trouble, partially because nobody ever guessed the extent of the problem, and partially because funding was never sufficient for checking how long I've been talking. I've been rambling on here. Funding is never sufficient, so what happened is the worst cases tended to wind up here. So you finally wound up with these temporary homes filled with children who are difficult to place. That place was eventually abandoned, and this was the newer facility. This still exists, building exists here. It's the County Extension Service in Brooklyn. And most of the facilities that they built, just like the town farm, had two wings, a male side and a female side, with an administration core in the center, with dining rooms, etc., the administrative offices. If this, like I said, if no town claimed a pauper, they would be a state pauper, and they would go to the state poorhouse. People hated going to the state poorhouse. People would, worse than they hated going to the town poorhouse, they'd run away and live in ditches rather than go to this place. This is in Tariffville section of Simsbury. It was originally run by a doctor. He died, and his sons took over and just ran it as a cash cow. And even the state report said, stop saying this, the state has a poorhouse. We don't have a poorhouse. There's this one in Tariffville that's terribly run, and we wish the state would stop sending people there. It's our famous Brooklyn jail, where people who committed worse crimes than drunken disorderly wound up. This is the Middletown Hospital for the Insane, which was built about the same time as our almshouse, and so we could send our mentally ill people here. Again, the two wings around the administrative core. This is the floor plan of it. You had the men's wing, the female wing, and dining rooms, and just like in our almshouse here. These are just some examples of other ones. This is the almshouse in the Middle Turnpike going to Manchester. That was at the police station until relatively recently. This is an example of the first selfie taken. This fellow took the picture with a string attached to his toe. And now it's torn down some years ago to replace it with a new police station. This is the almshouse, poorhouse in Middletown. This was built in 1820. This is one of the oldest almshouses in existence. It's still there. It's apartments now. They replaced that this in around the 1870s, and this is located just past the insane hospital in Middletown, where the Connecticut Valley Hospital is now. This is the this is down by the shore. What is this? Stonington, yeah. This still exists. This is a golf club. This center section is intact. The upstairs, it's a long corridor of room with little rooms on each side, little tiny rooms. This is probably the upper stories of the poorhouse were just like this. This is in Stonington. Doesn't matter where it is. It's the oldest building in town and was torn down recently. It was used for the poorhouse. A lot of graveyards, the poor were buried just with stones like this. In many cases, the stones were removed and thrown away to make mowing easier. This is the Woodstock Center Cemetery, and the Woodstock town farm is right through the woods here. This is a picture of it. It's the poorhouse back there and the barns that went with it, and behind there, going through the woods to get to the cemetery. This is the Putnam Town Farm. This building's still there. It's still a farm, a kind of a peculiar farm. The fellow has emu and odd birds there and other things, but his family bought the poorhouse after it was sold, and so it's been. These may actually be some of the original structures that were with the poor farm. This is the Mansfield Poorhouse, built in 1702, and this is the Mapleview Farm, the Maple Road. The family that ran the poorhouse for years and years lived in the house. They built the new house next door around the time of the Civil War, and for many years ran this as a private almshouse. This is the East Windsor poorhouse that was in that other picture of the people on the hay wagon and whatnot. This is Portland's. Some one's still there. This is Suffield. And part of the farms are still with it. And this one is Simsbury. This was like their bunkhouse. Actually, this is the main house. The front building and the section adjoining it, and the section in the rear, just like ours, probably built for the same reasons. Barn, and this was the tramp shack, basically, where the bunkhouse where the tramps slept. That place is pretty much intact as a community farm. And that's the end of my pictures. So it says hallelujah.